Now, while 2026 might have not gotten off to a good start, with us losing our beloved UIs, many of our favorite add-ons crumbling to dust, at the very least, what we got in return is some juicy Addon Developers Drama. Because in these past few days we've gotten a flurry of accusations, condemnations and unmasking of possible frauds and hack developers, which has led to a few add-ons being abandoned, some of these developers quitting, etc, etc. So we are here for today to collect all of these deets of all of these beefs together and go over them chronologically to detail exactly what happened. So, the first bit that happened early on, a few days ago, was Questionably Epic, a respectable site for WoW knowledge, releasing a list of recommended add-ons. Now, some of these add-ons were essentially somewhat disparaged for being potentially vibe-coded. Now, being vibe-coded is essentially a slight, is essentially a disparagement, practically an insult, for an add-on being coded through AI, at least with a significant amount of AI help. Now, normally, if the AI is in the hands of an experienced developer who knows what they are doing, still has relevant domain knowledge of whatever it is that he's working with, the AI will end up being a productivity boost. You will end up working fast if you work through the AI to help you. However, most of the case for WoW Addons is just players who are not programmers, don't actually know what to do, and simply let AI take the wheel, and eventually end up with some add-ons being quite junky, quite clunky, breaking down because of all the problems created by the AI coding the entire thing. So after this initial list made by Questionably Epic, we started with the slow burn of the add-on developer Danders, of the add-on Danders frames, use the add-on for party and raid frames, accusing ElvUI. The accusation was self-explanatory, that ElvUI had essentially yoinked a whole bunch of the code used by Danders for party and raid frames. ElvUI being an add-on that is an all-in-one that covers many other parts of your UI, including party and raid frames. People started digging into it, they found some significant similarities between the two add-ons. Eventually players started joking more about whether or not they were similar simply because they were both vibe coded and coded through AI. That's why they turned out to be similar. However, after a few days, Neph caved in. He announced the cease of development of the entire add-on of ElvUI, called the accusations of Danders slander, but this is where things got juicier, because in his farewell post he also added a little mention to Quazii, and this was a mention that referred to the content creator's add-on as essentially being mostly all stolen, basic code from a collection of other add-ons bunched up together into his own add-on, as well as, more importantly and more seriously, charging people, putting the entire add-on behind a paywall. Now this was initially already known. We had several weeks back, already in December, we can call it confirmation from Quazii that this was happening, at the very least in relation to ElvUI. He, Quazii himself, did admit that one of his developers back then did reference heavily the implementation of Quazii's UI's unit frame and cooldown manager styling add-on from ElvUI. But the claim was that the modules for the unit frames and the cooldown manager taken from ElvUI by this old developer will be deleted and rebuilt from Quazii UI's add-on. Now things, though, started ramping up after that, because Neph, all in all, is a very new, unknown, unproven player making a single add-on, born and died in a few days. However, when Lucky One chimed in, things changed. Because Lucky One, you might not know directly the name, however, he is the creator of ElvUI, the maintainer and developer of ElvUI. So, when he himself comes out to say, just so everyone is aware, the UI/add-on that Quazii is selling on his Patreon contains full one-to-one copies of ElvUI files and code, following up with pointing out that this is against the licensing and will result in an investigation via Patreon's copyright agent. That's where things got more serious, because now suddenly it's ElvUI accusing Quazii. Now Quazii initially tried to respond to the accusation of ElvUI, this was also scrutinized and looked into by players, finding out again, just like it was for Danders and Neph, similar pages of code almost identical. What was perhaps even more damning was the fact that even down to the notes, to the comments in the code, were practically identical to what ElvUI used to have. But a lot of the focus in here went to the paywalling, because Quazii, as a content creator, had been delivering informational content throughout the years, whether it was for increasing your FPS and styling your graphic settings, or tank routes for Mythic Plus, or things like nameplates, profiles for Plater. One of the things that happened back then is that most of the time he was following the same route, the same pattern that many of your currently watched content creators, streamers, for example, popular, race to world first players did, which is putting things like profiles, things like UI setups behind a paywall, whether it was things like a Twitch subscription, a Patreon, some kind of donation somewhere, which had been going on for many years. And that only included the profile, essentially the styling, the individual styling of each player. Where things got more serious is when Quazii decided to take a series of different add-ons, bunch them up together, put them under his own proprietary add-on, Quazii UI, and then paywall the entire thing. So not just a string, not just an import string of a personal player being gated behind a paywall, but the entire add-on. It's as if, for example, WeCoras, the entirety of WeCoras was behind a paywall. Or it's as if Plater came for free, but then they put behind the paywall the naming of every single mob. So you could download the Plater, but then you would have to input every single mob by yourself for the names to show up. Now, the terms of service of Blizzard have been quite clear on this. Add-ons must be free of charge. Developers cannot also create a premium version of add-ons for additional for-pay features, or charge money to download the add-on, charge for services related to the add-on, or require some form of monetary compensation to download or access an add-on. So that's why the example of Plater, limiting the nameplates, for example, showing up, wouldn't work under these terms of service. Now, players have made examples of other add-ons currently being allowed still that are very closely skirting the rules, the lines of this rule right here. A good example for this is Zygor guides, the leveling, profession, gold making guides, where you download an empty husk of an add-on with nothing in it, and if you want to make it work, you have to buy actual guides you have to buy essentially import strings to make the guide work, to make the gold making guide work. But you can technically download the add-on for free. The raid focused add-on allowing you to put all of your timers and reminders for your abilities and showing up in game, which you could also again download completely for free, but then you needed to actually be getting the string of all of the timers of the bosses, because if you were downloading the add-on by itself didn't have essentially anything for bosses. You had to get an actual import string for it. But most of the difference was that one way or another these add-ons were free, at the very least at their base, whereas Quazii's UI's version was already fully pay-per-use and at no point of it that was free. This gained more ground and more attention, down to even Reddit asking for the head of Quazii for this rule-breaking add-on. It didn't take long, more or less than a day, for Quazii to cave in and come out with a pretty dramatic announcement that he was leaving the scene altogether. And this meant his entire Discord had been nuked, his YouTube channel had been nuked, Patreon refunds being allowed, in the announcement that he was quitting development of the add-on itself and just leaving the game altogether. Obviously, with these kind of announcements, many players started chiming in, bad-mouthing the player himself, mentioning that most of the tools he was delivering were being stolen from others anyways, like the nameplate profile of Quazii was just a rip-off of Jandy's with different colors, or the base UI was just a rip-off of ElvUI. But ultimately this highlights what we pointed out the first time we started thinking about all of these add-ons popping up to replace our old gold standards of add-on we've had for years, which is the fact that we were about to enter this gold rush of Addon Developers era, this Sengoku Jidai era, this Holy Roman Empire era of this fragmentation of add-ons, because now that WeCora is gone, there are gonna be multiple other add-ons popping up trying to fill the void and trying to create their own version to be used in the future. Others have started chiming in on the toxic, on the unhealthy additions that certain third-party WoW sites started to bring into the game, which is the collection of add-ons, the suite of add-ons delivered by Wago.io, sponsoring this kind of behavior and encouraging this kind of behavior for add-on makers. But this is where we have landed for now. 2 add-ons are now dead, and now there is even more talk about multiple of these add-ons currently still being in the works, about being vibe coded, being junk, being messy and unstable due to how now having so many different add-ons popping up as attempts at replacements of what Blizzard has now essentially disabled in this pre-patch. We will see how this will develop in the near future as we move over closer to the release of the expansion, but for now this was the end of the drama, at least for the moment. That's where we have ended for today in this weekend. So with this recapped, we can now leave each other. We're starting our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching, see you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, honestly, I wish we had a little bit more. Just some more developers chiming in, starting some kind of round table of shit talking between themselves. It would have been funnier.